So let us begin, and whoever would like, our organizers will help us to let them in. So I welcome officially all of you now. Good evening, or good day, or good morning, maybe even, depending on where you're watching us from. We are going on with a series of our webinars together with the company of Procurement Central and the company of IPSM. The webinars are devoted to the topic of procurement. My name is Marina Trepovar, and today I will be the moderator of the current webinar, which is devoted to the issue of outsourcing of procurement, whether it is efficient and how useful it can be for the businesses. The second moderator is Mr. Stephen Wills, who is the founder and the partner of the company of Procurement Central. And now, Stephen will introduce from his side the speakers, and I will introduce Ukrainian speaker because we'll have Sergiy Dovgalenko with us. Sergiy has a huge experience of work in various international companies in various countries in commercial and public sectors. And he used to be the head of procurement. He dealt with the category management, and he practiced lots of interesting tools, which we will be speaking about with you. Sergiy is one of the speakers today, and now I give the floor to Stephen. Please, Stephen, would you introduce your team?
Certainly, thank you, Marina, and welcome everyone to our International Roundtable event on outsourcing. So outsourcing has been very high on procurement's agenda for some time, but since the pandemic, supply chain managers and directors have been reconsidering outsourcing, measuring the benefits and the risks. Do goods and services remain in-house or get outsourced? As Marina said, to help us consider the strategic matters, we have 3 senior international speakers, all with real-life experience to share their insights with you. As Marina has introduced Sergiy, I will introduce you to firstly my colleague Debbie Sorrell. And Debbie will be introducing, perhaps give us a wave, to Elaine Durante.
Hi.
And they will both introduce themselves in one moment. Just a few words about Larry. Larry will follow the first speaker, which is going to be Elaine. And Larry has been leading senior roles across numerous sectors, including regulated organizations. Larry is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. During the early part of Larry's career, that was in the automotive sector, where he worked and lived in all major regions of the world. So he's very experienced in sectors and geographically with procurement and also with outsourcing transformation, particularly across food, utilities, and the aviation sectors. So Larry has built up a wide range of outsourcing experience with these blue chip companies, and he's held various non-exec roles. So Larry, perhaps give us a little wave, and then Larry will be speaking after Elaine. So over to Marina, do you need to say anything else, or shall we continue?
Yes, I would like to add that today, the significance of outsourcing has strengthened and has become more relevant as we are all together are not working at our workplaces, but from our homes. We can be located wherever we would like to, and any person can conduct this or that kind of job without being at the office. So the research company of Veres Group has estimated the market of outsourcing of procurements. They have conducted the huge research, and they consider that with the help of the literate approach or the proper approach with the use of the outsourcing of procurement processes, you can at least save 20% and in some of the spheres even more. So the market of those services all over the world is growing 2 to 3% a year. So it is increasing, of course. So we have defined this topic of this webinar and consider that this topic is relevant not only for well-developed countries like the UK and the European countries and other countries, but as well for the developing countries, because we need to look at that closer, and there is some use for the business. Then we will look at the case studies, how the process is ongoing, what's the use of outsourcing of procurement. The company of IPSM is dealing with outsourcing of procurement. That is why this topic is interesting for us from the perspective of the research and the demand and the request at the market. Stephen, would you announce the first speaker now, please?
Yes, thank you, Marina. I will. In fact, I'll hand you over to Debbie, who will introduce herself and then introduce you to the first speaker. So Debbie, please.
Thank you, Steve. As Steve said, I'm Debbie. Myself and Elaine are both also fellows of the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, along with Steve and Larry. I have spent my career working in commercial, so mainly in procurement, but I've also worked on the sales side. So I've been involved in selling outsourcing deals. So I worked for a big global IT services organization for a lot of years, initially running procurement in Europe, the Middle East and Africa. And then after that, I actually got involved in selling solutions. But I've also worked in the chemical industry and in global logistics. And I've, for a number of years, been helping clients across public and private sectors with all of their commercial requirements, if you like, helping people to do things. So in terms of outsourcing, that's a huge range of things that have been outsourced. Ellie and I worked together back in the sort of early 90s, probably, on the first ever outsource of European logistics for an organization. So it was the first time a company had actually outsourced all of their logistics on a European-wide basis. So that was very interesting and a big learning curve. We've come a long way from then, but I think it's pretty important to consider the basics. So starting with the make or buy decision, as we call it. So do you do it yourself, or are you going to outsource? Why are you going to outsource, and what are your business drivers for doing that? Making sure that they're valid. And I think Marina picked up a very good point. I'm lucky enough to spend some of my time in the Caribbean. And the Caribbean is becoming quite a centre for what they call nearshore outsourcing for the Americas, with lots of business processes, legal business processes, procurement outsourcing, all kinds of BPO business being conducted in Caribbean islands in, at the moment, call centres. But obviously the pandemic gives the option to have virtual call centres and people actually located at home rather than in offices in that BPO sector. So that will be very interesting, I think, to watch and see what happens in that area.
There is the question, as for Kralic matrix, which quadrant should be outsourced in the matrix? The speakers are speaking about the strategic quadrant, and I'm in doubts about this statement. Maybe I misunderstood you. Victoria asked this question.
Okay.
Could you comment upon that?
Yeah. So I think it is strategic, because if you're outsourcing anything, you need it to work. But that doesn't mean that if you're outsourcing procurement categories, that doesn't necessarily equate to you would outsource the category that is strategic to you. Okay, so it's a subtle difference. Okay, so in the Kralic matrix, you would be tending to maybe outsource those in the tactical section, and also those in the leverage box might be good candidates to outsource, recognizing that you need to get the outsourced provider to do lots of competitive activities to make sure that you're getting the good costs in that. So if you were to outsource categories in the leverage box, then that would potentially give you a better business case in terms of cost, because that's where you typically tend to make a lot of your savings. And if you're aggregating volume by using an outsourcer that has lots of other companies' volume to add in, then you could potentially make a lot more savings in that category. Now, that's if you're outsourcing the actual buying and not just the processing. So I think it's careful that we understand just exactly what we're looking at here. Are we outsourcing the processes for procurement, or are we actually outsourcing the buying? And if we're outsourcing the buying, which categories we do that in? But I think the reason that we're talking about it being strategic is that any outsourcing is by definition, a critical contract. You can't risk it being done wrongly, otherwise you'll never get a chance to do it again, because it will lose all credibility in your organisation. So it's very important to make sure it's a success.
And Victoria also goes on, she asks us the question, which is similar, but not quite the same. She asks us which categories are usually outsourced. And again, Ellie and Debbie, I think where she's coming from there is to say, is there like a maturity curve? Is there, to your point about high risk, high complexity, a reason why we might consider outsourcing one item? And obviously CrowdCheck points us in the right direction, but it might also be that with high risk and high complexity, we decide we're not going to do it at this moment in time. And I can think of, Ellie talked about regulatory, I can think about political reasons why we might decide not to go into outsourcing something, even though, as you've both said, the business case would add up in terms of pounds or euros. But here, Victoria is asking us which particular categories would we look at for outsourcing. And I suppose the obvious one is the low risk, low complexity. And obviously in the right-hand box, the collaborative partnerships, we would need to have a number of factors that we think about before jumping in to outsource those. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think yes, but I think it's individual to the organisation. And also one of the drivers for outsourcing is to gain experience that you don't necessarily have in-house. So you need to look at what you're good at, what your competitive advantage is, what you want to keep, because that's your competitive advantage, or business secrets or whatever, or something that's really, really important to you. And maybe, your expertise isn't in running facilities. So you might want to outsource your facilities management to an FM company who've got much bigger volumes and a lot of experience doing that. So I think we need to look both at the CrowdCheck matrix, our own organisation and what its business drivers are and why we're looking at outsourcing. Be really careful that we have the correct drivers identified for why we're doing it, and then also look at, well, what about the external marketplace? Are there providers? Because that's going to be different in different geographies. So for us in the UK, we can probably outsource almost every category, but we don't choose to, because that's an individual business decision. Ellie, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that's fine. Sorry, I got thrown off for a few minutes.
Oh, did you? I wonder where you'd gone.
No, I've been completely thrown off into space.
All right. So Tadis just has a couple of questions for you, Ellie. I think they're relatively straightforward. So I think the question she's asking you is BPO. Do we call it BPO? Do we call it outsourcing? business, probably Debbie was alluding to this about the processes around that. And the other thing that Denise asks is, which I think you've answered, is this specific strategy to protect the company from all the risks that we know exists. And, you know, we can look at a long list of, as we've just said, we've got Brexit in the UK and political changes in countries with leaders, and also legal exposure. So it is a bundle of risk. And some people talk about offsetting your risk when you're outsourcing. So maybe we could just ask you for a couple of comments around that.
At the end of the day, you can't really outsource risk. You have to also be aware that outsourcing risk comes at a cost. So it's going to reduce your business case the more risk you're expecting the supplier to take on. But I think I would also say that all of those things that Ellie went through in the presentation are ways of reducing your risks.
Yeah.
Because it's in the way that you do it. There's not a technique or a kind of magic way to reduce your risk. You just have to do everything thoroughly. And I think if I just made a few notes to summarize what Ellie said. And I think, you know, if we start, the first thing I'd say is ensure you have the correct business drivers. You've identified them and you know what they are, so you know why you're doing the outsourcing. You need to do thorough planning. You need to be an intelligent client, giving both sides time to do their due diligence. So that's you as well as the outsourced provider. It's better to have a small, in terms of money, business case and a great service delivery than a big business case and a failed service. The relationship is key, so are cultural factors. And you need to have effective governance. That's what I took from the points that Ellie was making. And if you do all of those, then that is reducing your risk.
Okay, super. Thank you. Marina, back to you.
Thank you so much. And I think that now, thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Debbie, for the discussion, for the questions and answers. And I can see that the audience has the interest and they're trying to find out, to figure out how important it is, how useful it is, and which criteria should be the decisive ones when you go into outsourcing and when you make a decision whether you should do it, as it is said in the procurement, to find the way by decision. It was a very interesting discussion. So now, can I add, Marina? Yes, sure, Sergiy. Well, I would like to, dear colleagues, I would like to express my opinion about those two questions which were mentioned in the chat. First of all, about which categories should be outsourced or not. Well, the company of Everest Group, which was mentioned by Marina above, they have defined 4 criteria to define the key category, which won't be outsourced. The first one is that this category is connected with the procurement of the key ingredients for the manufacturing of the goods which are manufactured by the company. The second is the source of competitive advantage. The third is the critical element of the quality system of the company. And the fourth one is the so-called value enabler. This is the category which provides additional value to the business, value added. So in those 4 signs and categories, we can take certain decisions whether you should outsource them or not. And you should definitely shouldn't do that at the first stage, at the early stage. I wouldn't advise to begin outsourcing with the key categories. As for the questions, whether we say outsourcing or BPO, well, in fact, the complication is in the definitions. It's even more serious, this difference, because we say that there are some sub-chapters of outsourcing as staff augmentation. This is a so-called filling of certain gaps in your resources. So if you just need some experts for some time, and it is outsourcing as well, you can just take to use the services of category management manager for some time. You can take the team for the outsourcing, the whole category team, which would provide the full scale service, and this is more looking like BPO. And in fact, we have some other types of outsourcing like managed services. Those are the services when the services are really connected closely with the obligations on the indicators of quality, so-called service level agreements. And rather often those services are given with the infrastructure management. For instance, together with the business processes outsourced, you're also outsourcing certain elements of your e-procurement system for them to operate in this system, to support it, and to be responsible for its functioning. And in the rather soon, in the close future, we'll have procurement as a service. This is also type of the outsourcing, which is totally automated. It's automation of outsourcing services when you, as well as now, you are paying for the use of the software, you will pay for the use of certain services according to some standard monthly payment. And gradually, when there are certain processes like artificial intelligence or robotic process automation, when they are working and when lots of our activities are automated enough, we'll be able to procure those services from the providers of the automated services, as well as we do that from the software providers. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sergiy. So this is about the understanding of the subject and the vocabulary we should choose. It really helped our listeners, I'm sure, to define the difference between BPO and outsourcing. You're totally right that the world is moving on to use procurement as service. The procurement as a certain service, and then it can be totally used. The BPO, the business process outsourcing, which was asked by our listener about. Thank you so much. Now we have some more messages, but now I'd like to give the floor. Oh yes, Tades says super, thank you. And Allah and Victoria are saying thank you for those definitions which we defined, and Sergiy helped us in that. I'd like to give the floor to Larry now, and then we'll come back to Sergiy. And Larry, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. Pleased to be here. So let me just move this down here. So the title was Procurement Outsourcing, Can It Bring Value to the Business? So before we start, there we go. Just a snapshot. Steve gave a very good outline of who I am, what I am, and there's some of the companies that I have had the fortunate to work for. 3 of them are private sector companies that have to follow public procurement processes, so that's the ultimate challenge. And Greencore, as a little bit of trivia, is the world's largest sandwich manufacturer. So if you ever wanted to know who it was, it's Greencore. So that's who I am, and I think Steve explained about myself. So can it bring value to the business? Can procurement outsourcing? We've had Ellie give some great insight along with Debbie. Yes, I say, but there's always a but. There's always a but to these things, and I'm just listing those here, and we're going to just go into a little bit more detail on the bullet points that you see here. A lot of them, it's no surprise, have been covered by Ellie and Debbie in some way. I don't believe in partnerships, so on the 4th bullet point you see not a partner, which I expand on later. And you have to measure your success. But let's crack on. Oh, we've got the 3-box model. That's good, isn't it? So here's the 3-box or the 4-box model, which most people know about. Market on the left-hand side, spend going across the bottom. So top left-hand corner, I put make sure that they're on the Christmas card list. These are the few or only suppliers where you can get that particular category from, or as a widget that you could only get from one place, and without that you have a problem. 2 of the companies I worked for were water companies, and in the UK there's only one chlorine supplier in all of the UK, so they would be in the top left box, and I wouldn't suggest you outsource that. You look after them personally yourself. Bottom left, nuisance little value, that's the 80% of transactions, 20% of the value. They're your MRO items. If you're in a manufacturing environment, they're the ones you would want to try and aggregate, put together, and ideally move them across to the bottom left-hand corner, which you can also outsource as applicable. Things like packaging would be in that, usually in that bottom right-hand corner if you're a big distributor in some way. Top right-hand corner, I put in the little thing there called help, and a lot of the time you hear that you never outsource those that are important to your business, but sometimes you just don't know, you don't have that expertise. I had the pleasure of being the purchasing director of Aer Lingus. At the time it wasn't part of IAG, which includes BA and Iberia. It was on its own, and I was responsible for buying fuel. I knew nothing about buying fuel for airlines, so I outsourced it. I didn't outsource it to a consultancy. I found a guy, semi-retired Australian, who actually worked for a fuel company, and he was wonderful. He was wonderful, and I will talk a little bit more about that later on. So going back to that question, I would say top left, you never outsource. Bottom left, bottom right, you do if you need to. Top right, to do it in a considered way. And generally, top left, top right are the ones that are core to your business, so they're the ones you want to keep close to yourself. Oh, top tip. Another reason why you might want to outsource, and I think it's been mentioned, where you don't have the technology to create a step change. You need technology, and maybe it's a software that you can procure, but maybe it's better to outsource the whole process. You need a step change in performance. Every business, everywhere, anywhere in the world needs a step change. And in some ways with outsourcing, you need to be humble. You can't be great at everything. And if you actually want to go from vinyl to the cloud, maybe you need help in that, and therefore outsourcing it is the fastest way. 3 years have passed. I'm a firm believer of working in 3-year cycles. So if you've done something for 3 years, like if you have a strategy in your department and it's 3 years old, I would say it's time to have a new one. Change is good. Refreshing things are good. If you've had a relationship internally or externally for 3 years, you need to test it to see if it's still as hungry as it was, as good as it was when you started 3 years ago. In a lot of cases, you can do better. You outsource it if you have a problem. And that's an interesting one. I've heard the phrase many times, you don't outsource a problem. And I think that came out in some conversations earlier on. I'm a believer of actually, I would say you can knowingly outsource a problem, because solving the problem might take you more time than actually outsolving and resolving the problem. So I would say, if you are going to outsource a problem, know what you're outsourcing. That's interesting. Oh, there we go. You heard it a lot from Ellie about the need to get internal buy-in, the right culture. Of course, classically, you would say commitment from top management is required behind that. If you don't have a history or you haven't done much outsourcing, of course, you're going to struggle. There's going to be resistance internally. You know, there's always, you have to be humble. When you're outsourcing, I'm a firm believer you have to be humble. I was humble enough to say I knew nothing about aviation fuel. I also knew it was a risk if I did try to get involved. But if you haven't got that history, it's going to be a challenge. And usually it happens within lots of organizations. It's them and us. We've always done it this way. Now you've got someone from the outside doing it. And in some cases, people will try and make it fail. I'm a firm believer change is good. And we'll talk more about that later on. And is your organization one that drives for performance, drives for success? If it is, you should be outsourcing. And in some cases, it's easier to get a performance change by outsourcing. It's more challenging, as it said earlier on, is managing the outsource to deliver that success. You need the right provider and not a partner. And by that I mean it's all to do with tension. I believe in tension in a relationship, and you don't know. I've never really heard anyone else say this, but I'm a firm believer in positive tension, not destructive tension. You want both sides to keep hungry in the relationship. You know, it's a bit like at marriage. You know, is the marriage still as keen, as hungry in year 1 as it will be in year 3 or 4? And it's a lot of it in the business environment is to do with tension. You need to be honest enough with each other, and you need to continually have this positive tension, not destructive tension. The last thing I want to be is a partner with anyone. I believe you try before you buy. So if it's something you've not outsourced before, take a subcategory or take an element of it before you buy it as a service or a product. It will test out the cultural fit between the two companies, but just as important, it will test out internally if you're ready to outsource. As I said, whatever you do outsource, expect it to be at least a 3-year relationship. It doesn't mean that it won't be longer, but what you're doing, you're doing for at least 3 years. If you're intending to do it for something less than that, I would then challenge, is that the right thing to outsource? Work with someone who has a track record, who has the experience. You don't want to be the first of anything, be a fast follower, but having someone who's been there, done that before, de-risks the outsource. And part of that is getting real references. I'm sure many of you in your sourcing processes ask for references. When has anyone given a bad reference? I've actually had a few examples, but in general cases, most people give references that are going to be good news. By getting real references, that means you go to the marketplace and talk probably informally to those people to get the real take on the potential provider you're intending to use. You need knowledge. I think you heard it there from Ellie and Debbie. Don't outsource your brains, be the intelligent client. And I can't emphasize that enough. It is amazing the amount of companies decide to outsource. When they outsource, they think they're outsourcing the whole intelligence of that particular category. Document your process. But again, I'm amazed the amount of organizations when they're intending to outsource something, they don't actually know what they're outsourcing. It's all right if it's a clear category that's got a specification and it's something that you manufactured in the past, but if it's a process, there's a good chance it hasn't been documented. So you need to map out your process, and the best way I think of doing that is with some brown paper and process mapping. And if you've never done that, it's a fascinating exercise. You learn a lot, and of course then you can replicate that with the potential outsourced providers to understand how would their process works, and therefore you see the differences, you see the roadblocks, and you see the opportunities as well. And if you need help mapping out your processes, I'm sure people like Procurement Central can help. And also shadow the expertise. If you're outsourcing something for expertise, don't just leave it to the expert. I had this young buyer, and I got him to shadow the aviation fuel buyer. So it was never 100% outsourced to as far as the supply base concerned it was, but internally there was a young guy who was learning the experience of buying aviation fuel. And I'm a firm believer in shadowing. Yeah, you heard about fully and professionally managed is what Ellie said. I quite like that. I quite like that. And it's classic stuff. You need, like any relationship, supplier relationship management, contract management, whatever words you use, you need to manage the relationship. You need to manage the outsource. Again, I'm amazed that amount of companies love putting KPIs, but they're never joint. They're always one way. They're always on the side of the outsourcer to do X, Y, and Z, and there's none that are actually you're signing up to as well. So again, the relationships. Oops. Okay. For those who want to know, here's my cat. Ah. He's just turned up. So anyway, and his name's Lucky. Lucky, you have to go now. So joint KPIs. Again, it shows a culture of business if they just want KPIs on one side of the relationship. Regular reviews. You heard from Helly and Debbie, like you could have regular reviews at all levels. I'm a firm believer in the quarterly review process. It's a moment of truth for both sides. Of course, when you first start off, you probably have monthly reviews, but it's amazing the amount of things get sorted out before a quarterly review to ensure that things are in the right order. A project plan with milestones, again, it's always one-sided, I feel, but if any outsource requires sign up on both sides, for people to sign up on both sides for clear responsibility and accountability, you need some form of project plan and a culture of learn, change and improve. No outsource will be perfect. You need to learn from it, you need to change from it, you need to improve. But again, it's the culture of your business if it's willing to learn, change and improve. And aim to be a case study. There's nothing better than sharing success. Yeah, aim for the top, aim for the best, and if you're a case study at the end of it, for the right reasons, there are case studies of disasters, but if you're a case study for the right reasons, it's something that will breed success. Success breeds success. You heard about processes. So what's the right area to outsource was one of the questions. Classically, it could come from a category plan. If you haven't got category management or you haven't introduced category management, start off with some category management training. There's nothing better than out of the training to come up with a category plan. Out of that category plan should have the logic of why you want to outsource certain products. And there are many people can help you with your category management training, but it's something that is extremely powerful when you try to sell it internally within your organization. There could be a business need or emergency, so you really have a need to do it, and therefore a lot of the barriers will be broken down. And as I said here, it could easily be a transactional process, and that's the classic BPO, business process outsourcing, and the procure to pay one is a classic one. So you're in some ways you're keeping the high level intelligence within your business, the category expertise, and you're outsourcing the in this case the procurement to pay process, the transactional process. But and I've been in businesses that are introduced a shared service center, and that's been interesting, where you've got anything from finance to marketing to procurement, all working in a shared service center. And it's amazing how resistant some parts of the organization are moving their transactional services to the shared service center. Personally, I loved it because it just created a new environment that took away the transactional processes and put them into an area that had this expertise and skill to deliver. So can outsourcing bring value to your business is, I think, the last question we're coming on to. Value has hard and soft measures, which I'm sure everyone knows about. finance generally like the hard measures. So when you talk about the soft measures, the soft skills, you can see their eyes close and they start yawning. So you need to know, whatever you're outsourcing, you need to know your costs. If you're outsourcing a transactional process, it's more than just the manpower costs. In my world, there are 4 elements to cost. So when people talk about cost savings, they actually usually mean price savings, but cost is made up of 4 things. It's the price, it's the volume, it's the process, and it's the technology. Price, volume, process, technology. They make up simplistically the 4 elements of cost. So you need to know your costs before you intend to outsource. If you don't, you need to get help. So what's a good return on investment? And of course, that's up for debate. I promise 1 to 4 for every pound, euro, or dollar spent. They get 4 back within a year. Most CFOs, finance people love that, and I find that's generally quite easy to deliver. And you should expect 1 to 7 at least. But deliver, if you promise 1 to 4, most people will nod their heads that they get it back in 1 year. So other areas which could be outsourced besides the ones we've just spoken about, property management facilities is a classic one. I spoke to a major outsourced provider last week. They're extremely nervous in the current pandemic world because, of course, if you're a facility management and there aren't many people going to, or as many people going to be using those facilities, there is less volume for them going forward. If you have outsourced your property management facilities and it's a fixed price, I would reconsider that, because potentially in the new world, there will be less property and facilities that need managing, as more and more of us will be working from home. And the providers are extremely nervous, you know, as we come out of this pandemic. It was an interesting conversation. Payroll, if you haven't outsourced your payroll, very easy one to do. Pension management, generally it's linked to payroll in some ways, but historically it's been finance controlled. Again, if procurement has the influence within an organization, you work with the finance. Generally, whoever's managed, if you've outsourced the pension management, it's usually been with the same provider for 20, 30, 40 years. And maybe it's time going back to having tension in the relationship to maybe consider a new provider. Legal support is always a fun one. The general counsel of the organisation like to work with their chosen legal lawyers' support. Again, procurement getting involved, again, it's usually down to where you are in the organisation, how much you can influence people to get involved in legal support, but it's fascinating when you do. Another one, hire to retire. That's another process that is like a BPO process, or as many people say, hire to fire. And when that's been done, it works really well, but generally it's a transactional process. I recommend you keep the business or introduce HR business partner in-house. So the interface with the department, the primary interface relationship management internally is kept in-house, but the whole hire to fire transactional process can easily be outsourced. Conclusion summary. So you need to maximize your outsourcing to deliver real value for the business. Easy to say, but it's a given. You know, the vast majority of transactional activity can be outsourced, and then category expertise or just technology that lacks in your business needs to be outsourced. Do not outsource your brains, as you heard in the previous discussion. Be the intelligent client. Develop your plan and expected benefits for outsourcing. If you need help, there is help around from outside people, because you need to have a plan. Try before you buy. Again, get to know each other. It's both ways. It's both ways. Before you take the major step, just make the small step. Like Confucius said, the longest part of a journey is taking the first step. So try before you buy. and get trained before you try. If you haven't got the expertise in outsourcing, if you haven't got the expertise in category management, I strongly recommend you get the training. And in the current world, whatever you do, keep safe. That is me done.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Larry. Marina, can I hand back to you now?
Yes, sure. Thank you so much, Larry. Thank you so much for your speech. I liked so much that you emphasized for multiple times about the similarities of cultures from the supplier and the provider of the services, the customer and the provider. And we can see that in the procurement, the people need to be trained, because this would allow us to speak the same language. It will allow us to articulate the task and to understand the needs. And of course, if you're precisely understanding and articulating the task, then in the process of interaction, you can be more constructive. In the process of interaction, you can come together to achieve the proper goal and to understand what you will check in the end of the day and how you assess the success of the project, or maybe lack of success. And that's what I really liked in your speech. Thank you so much what you emphasized, because it's not always when we take into account this element. Now I give the floor to our last speaker today, Sergiy Dovgalenko. I used to introduce Sergiy, but I forgot to say a very important point. I will correct myself now, because Sergiy now is a fellow of SIPS, that is the acting member of SIPS, the British Institute on Procurement and Supply Chains in Ukraine. And Sergiy so far is the only one in Ukraine like this, but we hope this is only the beginning, and we will have more fellow SIPs in Ukraine as well. It's not a novelty for the UK, of course, but still, there are lots of people, both they are member of SIPs and fellow SIPs, and I would like you to tell and to share your experience, which cases you had in your history, and what can you can say to those who are still contemplating, thinking about the procurement outsourcing to the customers, whether it is profitable and whether it is scary or not scary to outsource the procurement. Because I hear a lot about some prejudices or some of the frights that when you outsource some procurement part, we as the customers will get worse prices, worse services, and so on. There is such a prejudice. So far, I can't understand why, but still, would you tell about your experience? And if you may, would you comment on such people being afraid? Thank you, Marina. Okay, let us begin with, first of all, with the certain frights. Somehow, when people are speaking about the procurement outsourcing, they just imagine that there are some people coming to the office, they take your place, and you're crying out loud, you're taking your belongings to the box and going to the labor market to have free soup, and then the company is totally losing the management of the processes, and maybe you can even make more of drama and tragedy out of that. But in fact, what we are speaking about now, I've already mentioned that outsourcing has lots of other different dimensions and different types. Let's begin what's really underdeveloped in Ukraine and which is really well developed in the UK. That is interim specialists, the experts, who can be hired for some time with the contract, having a certain payment or payroll, who will temporarily cover some of the gaps in your resources matrix. What's important in that, besides you covering some of the gaps in the resources, you also can hire a person with a very interesting knowledge, kind of expertise and qualification, and this person can teach you a lot. Very often such experts are hired to launch some process. For instance, if you need the launch of the process of category management in the company, you take the interim expert and he is launching the whole process, training, showing, he is telling about his experience and bringing some unusual for your company experience and perspective onto the process. After he launched that in some time, let's say 6 to 12 months, he is giving the key from the city to the one who he brought up during those times, and then you get the adequate expert of yours and the proper system of processes. Unfortunately, somehow in Ukraine, everybody would like to get a ready expert to headhunt it from the competitors, instead of understanding that really we are also one of the elements of the outsourcing. Secondly, very often in the marketing procurement, we are using, when we would like to buy the services, to procure the services of some creative agency, sometimes we procure the services of the designer, and sometimes we procure the services of the whole team of people who are able to provide creative from A to Z. And the same, you can outsource the procurement team, who won't definitely take the whole process on their shoulders, but they will definitely create a certain competence line which you lack today. And we are constantly saying which categories should be outsourced. But why are we speaking about categories? If you would like to try outsourcing and how it is working and what are the possible outcomes and under what terms, let you have category management and outsource the procurement itself. So the process from the need emergence to the contract, source to contract, which will be done according to the well-prepared category guidelines. Because as of today, source to contract doesn't have anything unique in it. To bargain, well, anybody can bargain, but it's important to bargain and to work with the suppliers according to the overall strategy, cautiously, understandably, and well used by everybody. So you should prepare the category guidelines and take the ones who will deal with the sourcing, give this process to the experts who will be able to help you with that. And you will efficiently use your stuff in the category management itself. Moreover, one of the sample examples, success cases where I was working when I used to work in every company, this is the same example of outsourcing. We announced about the tender procedure among the biggest consulting companies. It's not a secret that the consulting companies have the sphere of the business, which is connected with outsourcing and with the development of the processes and with automation and implementation and so on. So Accenture or Bain are not doing consulting only. They have real implementers. So we announced the tender procedure to have the experts of the highest class and to provide us with the service to search for opportunities of savings, which we couldn't see because we lacked some competences. And depending on the savings, they could get a certain interest of the coordinated price. In such contracts, you need to be very cautious and serious about trust between the partners. First of all, the partners should make a deal. What savings are, how we can acknowledge and measure it, and how we can define it, how we can acknowledge it and coordinate it, and how we then use it, how it will be paid for. So in fact, it's the same outsourcing. A bigger company came, one of the biggest in the world, several dozens of people with the category expertise, 360 degrees, which totally covered our needs. They came, they analyzed the expenses, and they also defined the initiatives. They began to implement those initiatives, and after that, according to the outcomes of the efficiency indicators, I mean savings, of course, we paid them a certain part of the achieved savings. So we need to understand that outsourcing isn't definitely paid as one time or hour by hour payment. Sometimes outsourcing is a so-called contract on distributing risks, and not only risk distributing, but also revenues. Because we are making a deal together that there will be some experts coming who will help us to achieve additional savings, and we are motivating them that the part of this economy will be paid. Some of these savings will be paid. So why do we need to deal with to look at the outsourcing, and why everybody is so scared that we will get less savings if we give some categories for outsourcing? We need to understand, especially after what COVID did with all of us in the industry, that the emphasis of our industry are shifting from the savings to the speed, efficiency, and flexibility. As of today, how quickly and efficiently we are implementing the needs of our business and how they are implemented into some supplies, contracts, and the work with the counter agents, it's much more important than those 3 pennies which you can save. The quality is important, the high quality service which will be timely provided for your business. And for that, you, as all of us, and in any company, we are working under the conditions of the scarce resources. You will never have enough of resources. That is why your resources should be done, would give the biggest value added. But to provide tender procedures for a year or two and to fight with the suppliers for the 3% of the savings without giving business an opportunity to award the contract with some of the suppliers and to get revenues, in fact, this is the murder of the business of the company. So we need to think not what we save, that we save 3 pennies or 6 pennies, but we should think to attract the experts who will allow us to concentrate on what's really important for the business, and they will take the routine transactional work. That is why I would like to think I would like you to think about. And also you should Google, because there is vested contracts, one more interesting thing, vested contracts. So it's a kind of authorized ones. So beginning with 2015, at least that's when they were mentioned for the first time about those vested contracts, some of the companies decided to award contracts for outsourcing, not by the payment and not even by the risk distribution, but they measured the efficiency of outsourcing contracts according to the outcomes. They were not saying what I'm obliged to do for you as an outsourcer. They were speaking what I, as a customer, would like to achieve. For instance, if I gave the management of my real estate to some outsourcer, I can award a contract with them where the main component of the pricing will be the assessment of the satisfaction of my employees by the services from the providers. So the trust between the businesses and the customers and suppliers can be so high that they will entrust into each other, not just to award the contract and to follow each other to have the proper work done. They will work together to improve the indicators of business productivity of the customer. So the customer is creating the measure system he would like to achieve thanks to this or that service, and the provider begins to work how to optimize those indicators. So in the end of the day, well, this is a very long story, but I would like to say that in fact, the world of outsourcing is endlessly interesting. It's totally multifaceted, and it is done according to the trust. So I wouldn't recommend you to pose the question how we can soften the landing, because we will be definitely deceived. But we should think that in the modern business, you and your provider should not only trust each other, but to work for one result. Thank you. Thank you, Sergiy, so much for your experience and for sharing experience and for the examples you mentioned and listed. Well, of course, your speech brought to some questions, and it's okay. There is the question which is directly connected to what you were speaking about. Victoria is asking, she's going on to be very active. Sergiy, the payment for the consultant services was calculated from the savings de facto, and during how long time did you implement the initiatives on the reduction of costs? Well, yes, we decided to calculate the payment for the consultants out of the savings. So there is the saving of the current period, there is the saving of the future period. So if we now award a 5-year contract in 2021, everything which is in the financial years of 2022 and further on is the savings of the future period. So these savings will be restricted just by the current financial period only. It's not that easy to understand, because if in the middle of the year you begin the negotiations, up to the third quarter you award the contract, then to achieve some savings, they will have only 3 months left, but they have to conduct the analysis of expenses and costs to understand what situation he's at. He must provide the proper home task, and only after that provide some savings. So in fact, the adequate period of calculation of savings is 2 years from the awarding of the contract. It is adequate because since you signed the contract till you get the first payments, there will be at least half of the year, 3 months at least. I'm speaking about the bigger companies and bigger contracts. Several months will be spent by the provider to analyze your data, to define the initiatives which will bring the highest efficiency, to approve those initiatives with the business, by the way, and with you as well as the procurers, because any company, whether this is McKinsey or Boston Consulting, they will come to your company and they will say, I consider that you need to use Renault vehicles, not Mercedes. So those are nice expectations, but without the approval of the management, the savings cannot be implemented. So 2 or 3 months will be done for the preparation, and after that, we'll have the pipeline initiative. This is the sequence of the initiatives. And even the first initiatives will bring their fruits only in several months. So you should calculate that the provider will get the first revenue in 4 to 6 months, and he needs to cover serious investments. So you need to calculate for about the horizon of 2 years. Victoria is trying to clarify, what about the respite or the deferral of payment? 4 to 6 months, right? The first payment came to the provider in 6 months, right? And then In certain periods, they were paid when the results were achieved. Yes, quarter by quarter, we had a certain process to search for savings, to approve the savings, and to implement the savings. So when the initiative was going along this process, I would say formally that we had 4 flags to pass. So each initiative which passed the last flag was getting to the invoice. But again, we need to say that when the company where I was working, the multi-billion turnover company with the budget of procurement of $6 or $7 billion, even some companies like Bain or BCG, they would be ready to wait for 6 months to earn 150 million. They potentially saw such an opportunity. When we speak about the smaller projects of the less complicated and low complexity projects, it's important to assess the basis of the possible savings. If we say that if your company is spending, well, I don't know, let it be 1 billion hryvnia, let it be even 1 billion, but your budget of procurement is 1 billion. Okay, if we save 3% of it, this money will come to us in 4 or to 6 months. So whether it is possible for you as the IT provider to invest the money, I'm not sure that the providers would like to do that. They would like to have some prepayment, I say, for their minimal efforts which they can spend to prepare the whole project. And then they will get revenues depending on the success of the project itself. In any case, as far as I understand, it's always the process of a deal, of making a deal. It depends on the category, on the situation, and on the longevity of the project and the involvement of the people. I emphasize not only the category, but the types of activities. Yes, the types of activities. We're always speaking about categories for outsourcing, but we can give the sourcing, for instance. We can give some elements of source to contract process for outsource, but you can define themselves what you give for the outsourcing. You shouldn't just give it out, just take everything and give it to the outsourcing. Try to be choosy, begin with the smallest. Well, you have described how the company was working in IT Hub, but there are some different processes or some other opportunities in the procurement outsourcing when you can provide certain transactional operations for outsourcing and just to pay monthly payment for the processes if it is done. Well, that's what I began with when I was telling that you can take people for outsourcing, that is some physical bodies and some competences, or you can take the teams and those teams will perform certain actions. You can provide certain categories. So in fact, this is again a selective Lego constructor. Everything depends on you. You can choose and define what is the most important for you from the business case perspective. Yes, as it was told by the previous speakers, both Debbie and Elaine and Larry, that the main thing is to define the aim, the goal, and to define the outcomes you'd like to achieve, and to define the part you're ready to give for the outsourcing. To go with the smaller steps, if you're too afraid, you can take the smallest one to try, and then if it works, if there are certain outcomes, if you and provider have this chemistry and physics between you in the relationship, then you can go deeper. But if you don't have it, if you lack it, then because of some reasons, it's not working. Because of some reasons, it's not functioning. There can be lots of reasons for that. Okay, thank you so much. We've got one more question and I will come back to it. And I would ask the participants to ask the questions as well. Before I read it out loud, because it's in Russian, I would like to say that everybody was saying that we need to train to develop ourselves about the culture. We need to understand what is and how is working. And we were speaking about the category management and relationship, what's very important, both within the stakeholders and also with our external providers. So our company of IPSM is doing a lot to develop this culture in Ukraine and beyond. We have online trainings which are accessible to the public in Russian and Ukrainian. And I would like to say that soon we will have 2 trainings where you can get this knowledge, gain this knowledge and train. In May, this will be the negotiations training. And in June, this will be the category management training. And also I'd like to drive your attention that our next event, which will be done together with the Procurement Central and where we'll go on with the discussing of the procurement, will take place on the 20th of May, and it will be devoted to the management of and the relationship with the suppliers. This topic of relationship is so important. The suppliers relationships management is the topic we need to discuss and to develop this competence. On the post-Soviet space, this is one of the most painful topics, I would say, the issue of relationships. And we will be saying that what we need to do with the suppliers, how we should pay more attention to them. And also we have a Telegram channel, Procurement News, where we post interesting and useful news. Please subscribe it. My colleagues have sent the links to the chat, and they will be also sent out in the letters which we will send to all of our participants. And also I would like to mention the last question, so far the last one. Maybe there will be some to all of the participants of today's speakers. Whoever, would you please comment on that? So Allah asks, I have some of the persuasion that a typical CEO is not interested in procurement at all. The majority of tops are in the routine thinking. They're afraid to lose control over the procurement without concentrating on the outcomes of the procurement. Would you comment on that?
So I would like to comment and start. Can I just make a comment on that? So,
Sure.
I completely agree that when Larry aided and assisted by Lucky the cat was talking about a tensioned relationship with suppliers, actually what we're also talking about is a tensioned relationship with internal stakeholders. And I absolutely agree with that comment, that people in the business, and when Ellie was talking, she was saying about her view about managing the contract, the agreement, the outsourcing business case. But in actual fact, it's our colleagues in the business who could possibly undermine us, who could possibly talk to suppliers, and it's not with one voice. In many cases, you can have Ellie used the expression, a senior member of your organization, and obviously the CEO may not be speaking in tough love to the supplier. They may be speaking in a very familiar way, a very soft way, and that can put us at a disadvantage. So the point I just wanted to make here to that question was obviously your role in this, and there is a tool, you know, the old-fashioned RACI, the RACI, making sure that the governance is right before you go out and start engaging with suppliers, that is to say, looking at the marketplace. you need to establish yourself. You need to ensure your position in the organization is at the very least understood, what your role is. I'm sure Larry or Ellie said that, what your role is in all of this, because if you don't, people around you will undermine you and you will obviously lose confidence. The CEO does not, well, that's a blanket statement, isn't it? That they don't understand, but some do, some finance directors do, and others have a much more, what shall we say, binary view of procurement. So it's our job, the point I'm making is it's our job to educate and to sell what we sometimes loosely call strategic procurement to the stakeholders and to the business first. Sorry, Sergey, I probably cut across you when that question came in.
Есть что добавить, Сергей?
Sergey, do you have anything to add? Well, first of all, no, you did not cut me. I can't add much to what Stephen mentioned. Everything was totally right and adequate. But of course, CEO, we all know that CEO in lots of other our companies where I had to work at, they can be rather skeptic or narrow-minded in the procurement sphere. Then we need to define, first of all, how we can position ourselves in the company and to choose the paradigm before we change the process. So if you still are considered to be the best procurer or the best headhunter for the suppliers, then you don't need outsourcing. But if they don't expect anything from you anymore, but if you can show your superiors that you are much more useful and inventive and efficient for the company than just the person who is chasing the suppliers and taking their last shirt, then you can speak about the outsource. The beauty of outsourcing is that it is really well working with the business case. Any CEO and especially CFO will be definitely open and receptive for that. They will be open to receive information because the cases of outsourcing can be well digitalized. And we said that which indicators they have of return on investments, and they're rather adequate because with good money, you will be able to procure the best experts at the market who will definitely provide you an outcome. So please try to work on the paradigm of the procurement in the company itself and reposition yourselves as the suppliers of value added, not just sellers for the discounts. Thank you so much. You are very cardinal considering our Ukrainian reality. Yes. Okay, then. Do we have anything to add or should we finalize the session? Because we took too much of time already, but still everybody is staying with us till the end.
Yeah.
There are no questions left. Stephen, let us finalize, conclude.
So thank you everybody for attending. Thank you obviously to our amazing speakers and experts. So to Sergiy and to Larry and to Elaine and to Debbie for her expertise. Also thank you to those amazing voices in the background of the interpreters. As I say every time, you are the magicians. I have no idea how you do your job, but you do it very, very well. So thank you as always to you. I just wanted to say, and you'd expect me to say this anyway, there are lots of parts, what do they call it? Lots of moving parts. I think that's the current expression, isn't it? Lots of moving parts in outsourcing. So yes, as Sergiy said, companies like Bain & Co, you know, most of us have worked with them. They come in with very, very big, ambitious numbers. They bring in some very, very bright graduates, highly intelligent people, but they don't know your business. They don't understand what value means to you. So just be very, very careful of the expression Greeks bearing gifts, but consultants bearing big gifts for finance directors. It's not always the same, by the way, with purchase to pay. It's not always the case that everything can yield quite the big numbers that the likes of Boston Consulting and Bain say. Look at the total cost of ownership, as Ellie said. We can assist with some of the practical side, as Marina said, whether it's training or whether it's consultancy, whether it's helping you with business cases, pulling business cases together, whether it's, as Larry said, things like process maps, risk assessments, to look at the possible risks. And there, as Ellie said, it isn't for the faint-hearted. There are, I'm repeating what I've said, lots of moving parts, lots of things. You couldn't possibly think of a pandemic that would come along. I worked in insurance and there was a thing called the Twin Towers, and nobody could have possibly thought of that. There are things that come and happen, and having intuitive people to make judgments in supplier relationship roles is essential when that happens. So we can assist you with the risk. We can assist you indeed with calculating savings that are real, you know, that don't include cost avoidance and so on. So if you need our help, we're here. We'd love to work with you. But otherwise, it's a big thank you for attending, a big thank you to all the people that have taken part. And as ever, sending our love across the world, and hope to, as Marina said, hope to see you at our next event next month.
Всем до свидания.
So goodbye, everyone. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.